Are you a one-person marketing team, or perhaps you're a marketer who is wearing a lot of hats and has several other roles within the company? Or perhaps you have no marketing team whatsoever. Well, in today's show, we are going to be breaking down how you can start building that marketing team of your dreams by outsourcing the work that you don't have the time for or you don't necessarily have the skill set for. Welcome into another episode of Cyberly. I am your host, Blythe Brumleve, and on this show, we talk about the B2B marketing, the attention economy, and how it all fits into the world of logistics. And so in today's episode, we're actually going to be breaking down building your one-person marketing team by outsourcing to the growing freelance market. Sales connoisseur Michael Neme is going to be telling us where marketing and sales can actually become better aligned instead of becoming the enemies that they've sort of been known for in the past. And then Nick Dangles is going to be breaking down how freight tech fits into your processes and sales goal. It's a jam-packed show, so we're just going to go ahead and jump right into our main topic, which is outsourcing your marketing and starting those beginning steps of how you can start growing that internal team to really start growing your business. And so, in this study released by The Drum, it's a publication that I found out recently earlier this week that they had an exclusive LinkedIn study showing marketers are in demand, especially in digital. A few key stats from the study: on LinkedIn, some 381,000 marketing job openings were posted in the last year. And in the past 6 months alone, the site witnessed a 63% increase in marketing jobs. One in every two of the top marketing jobs listed on LinkedIn fall into the digital or media space. And in the past 6 months alone, LinkedIn has seen a 177% increase in the number of remote job postings for marketing roles. It's kind of a weird thing to see with a lot of these stats because especially during economic uncertainty, especially over the last year, like we experienced with COVID, marketing is usually the first thing that's cut. But based on this study, it's proven that over the last 6 months, things have started to settle down a little bit more. Folks have realized the importance of digital media and marketing, and they're starting to invest more in it, especially from a remote perspective. So, with all of these companies looking to hire and the freelancing market continuing to grow, let's talk about how to outsource your marketing effectively. As a marketer within the company, you probably have a lot on your plate, but your main role should not only be creative problem solver, but also the project manager, AKA the facilitator between your freelance team and the subject matter experts within the company. Essentially, you are acting as the conductor of the orchestra. And so, how essentially do we start to get this job done of outsourcing our marketing effectively? Let's talk about some of the do's because there's a lot of them. Now, the first up on this list is that you want to have a clear process for what you want done and the steps that need to be done. Start thinking of the flow within your website that you want users to take online. You need to be thinking about this because if you spend a lot of time on advertising or content and you don't have the flow set up right on your website from the jump, then you're going to be wasting a lot of time and energy. So think about that ultimate goal that you want people to take on your site once they arrive to your site. Do you want them to fill out an application? Do you want them to set up a sales meeting? Do you want them to book a demo? All of these different things, even fill out an application if you're recruiting drivers or employees on your website. Think about that ultimate end goal that you want users to take. And then we're going to start to reverse engineer how to get users to take that goal. And so once that flow is established, and then you want to define your processes within all of your marketing flows. So these roles can sort of look like writing a blog post. You want to also think about managing the content calendar, creating and sending emails, publishing to social media. So these are all different roles within your processes that once you start to figure out the flow of your site, reverse engineer the goals, and then you want to start to break down what those processes look like and then what roles need to be filled into each one of those processes. Because as a skill set, as a marketer, you're probably looking at, well, I can do one of these things really well, but I can't necessarily do these other things really well. So that's where you're really going to start thinking about building out what your frameworks look like, from idea to creation to publishing or launching and distribution. Do you want to create content once a week, publishing a case study once a month? Use a flowchart software. There's plenty of them out there on that. You can just Google the phrase flowchart software. What I like to do is I like to take a bunch of different post-it notes, and I will take post-it notes and I will map out the flow, and I will pin the post-it notes either to the floor of my office or on the wall. And that helps me visualize and change up the flow of what my processes look like. So determining the flow, determining your framework and your processes, all of these things are very essential in order to even think about starting to outsource your marketing, because you cannot delegate and you cannot outsource any part of your marketing unless you have your goals and processes defined first. So even though if you edit these in the future, which you will, I do so about once every 6 months, knowing the goal that you want the end users to take and how you theorize it can happen are those first few steps that you want to take. Now, as far as like the fun part of when you become the conductor of the orchestra, now you want to find your freelancers who specialize in what you listed in your process flow. So you can find these freelancers on Upwork, on Fiverr, even LinkedIn in the very near future will have this ability for you to look for freelancers on their platform. There's no word yet on when that feature is actually going to be released on LinkedIn, but it is coming. Now, for writing and copy, I don't see many companies doing this yet, but it's a gold mine. You need to hire freelance writers that have been impacted by other industries. So they've already been trained. They've probably already gone to college for this. Think of the sports industry, the local news industry. They've already been trained in journalistic writing and in interviewing and getting the stories out of people that can then be, I guess, dismayed or not dismayed, but displayed to a broader audience. You want to think about it in that regard. And those are the people that have those chops, that have that skill set that you're looking for. So as the conductor of the orchestra, you can be building out these writers that have been negatively impacted in another industry and bring them into your company and hire them on a part-time basis. You're using those same skill sets, and then you're acting as the liaison between those reporters, between those journalists, and the subject matter experts within your company. So think of the executives, think of the safety department, even your customer service and sales teams. All of those different people will apply when it comes to interviewing subject matter experts, which is key to developing that content strategy and developing messaging all across your digital media landscapes, whether it's your website or email marketing. All of these different landscapes, they can help you craft that messaging just by interviewing people already within your company. And so think about that whenever you're building your freelance team. Do you know of any writers that have been laid off recently? Do you know what? Look in your local news site and see what writers are already working a beat. And chances are they're going to be willing to take up some freelancing gigs. So make those connections, or you can find them on Fiverr, Upwork, and LinkedIn very soon. Now, a sample flow of what this process could technically look like. You could do a 3-part safety or a safety series. So think of it in 3 parts. You would coordinate a time slot between an executive and a safety director with your freelance writer. Then they conduct the interviews and write the interviews, maybe even film them or record them for a podcast, and then they submit them to you. You could proof those interviews, or you hire a copy or a video editor that they take care of the editing process for you, because not all of us are strong in the grammar department if you spent any time on social media lately. So think of it in that way, that they could proof, that you could hire a copy editor, you can hire a video editor, even a podcast editor to take care of the editing for you. Once approved, then they resubmit back to you. You'll probably have to go through an executive team in order for that approval process to take place. And then you can publish it out to your channels. And you could even hire a social media freelancer that could publish this out for you. So that's sort of bringing it back to the process of what kind of content you want to create, how often you want to create it, and then filling in the gaps of the skill sets that you don't have. And that way you can focus on the skill sets that you really do have and use the freelance pool that is growing and growing over the last year in order to start building your sort of powerhouse marketing team. Now, it's a lot of work that you're going to be organizing, but there are tools that will help you. It's tools that I have used in the past, that I use today, project manager tools. I use ClickUp personally. I've used Monday.com in the past, and I love them. Asana, I've heard many great things about. Trello is another one that I've used. The only downside of Trello, I would say, is that you can't assign people that I know of in ClickUp and Monday and Asana. You can assign your freelancers so they get notified through an email or through the platform that, hey, you've been assigned a new project and it's your turn to sort of take the reins from there. And then you can watch the whole flow, the whole process take place. It's sort of taking a step back. The biggest takeaway here is that you have the benefits of using a marketing agency without the overhead. And you still get the value of using your subject matter experts within your company and to position your company better than if you were to say, hire a writing mill that's going to pick a few keywords of SEO that you want to target and hope and pray that you rank for them 6 months from now. That just doesn't realistically work. In today's marketing world, you really want to use your subject matter experts within the company who are actively talking to customers, who are handling current customer issues, who are talking to prospects. Even in the accounting department, the finance department, you want to be having those regular meetings because your process will likely change after you have gone through these steps a few times. You'll be more efficient. You'll find better ways to manage it. And that is perfectly okay, because there are some things that you got to keep in mind when it comes to defining this entire process, is that it will change. Mine changes about once every 6 months. And so don't expect, also, when you're hiring a marketing freelancer, do not expect them to know immediately of what your expectations are. Give them a few different assignments and get a good feel for what their skill set is before you decide that they're not a good fit. Unless they're just an absolutely dreadful writer or they just have just bombed on their first assignment and there's no chance of recovery, then it might be a situation where you have to say goodbye to that freelancer and move on to the next one that you had on your list. But don't expect a marketing freelancer to pick out, the keywords and write a generic blog post. They need a plan from you, and you need to be able to provide that structure to them, which brings us back to the processes and flows that you determine internally. So then that way you can outsource to people that have already a good fit for the skill set that you're looking for. You're going to have to go through a few freelancers in order to figure it out, but don't give up. After a few blog posts, like I said, or even editing wise, video, podcast, anything like that, any kind of content medium that you're trying to target, that you're trying to go after, give that freelancer an opportunity to get a good feel for your company first, know what style you like, and then that way they can evolve and get better. If they're not getting better, then it's sort of a situation where you have to treat them like an employee, where if they're not getting better at their job, then you probably have to part ways with them. But give them at least an opportunity to get better and to learn your company. So offer up a prelim period of working together. And if all goes well over time, you may be able to move them from a freelancer role to a part-time or even an in-house full-time role. And that's really how you start to scale your marketing department, because usually companies, like I said earlier in the show, they only have one person handling marketing and they're doing a bunch of other different things, or they have nobody handling marketing. So this is a slow growth process, but using freelancers, using the growing remote workforce that's out there, then you can really start to build your team from a foundational level, setting that good foundation up first internally, and then you can start bringing in those freelancers that you have outsourced, and you can start bringing them in, maybe not working inside of the office because it's a remote world now. And likely a lot of these freelancers and remote workers don't want to come into your office, but at least you can give them the opportunity to become more of a valued member of your team. And finally, and this is a big don't that's becoming an increasing problem, because I would say that over the last couple of years, marketing has really evolved, especially the marketing and sales relationship of how they coexist in a cohesive environment. And I would say that don't work for a leadership team that doesn't value marketing. In order to be a really good marketer, you have to be a creative problem solver. You have to be a facilitator. You have to constantly be in the know within your own company, and you have to know what's driving revenue. So if you know all of these different things, then you can start to build out that value added marketing plan that's going to take time and it's going to take an investment. I would say on average, anywhere from 8 to 12 months is a good time frame from when you start a marketing plan in order to start seeing some initial results. Anywhere as early as I would say 6 months, but really anywhere from like 8 to 12 months is when you're going to start seeing some initial benefits from implementing a marketing plan. A study I talked about earlier at the beginning of the show just proves how in demand a lot of these different roles are becoming. So, if you're working for a leadership team that doesn't believe in what you do, there's plenty of other companies out there that are hiring. So, take advantage of the opportunities that you have right now. But if you don't have a leadership team that believes in marketing and that believes in what you're doing and is willing to invest in your role and invest their time into waiting for those to come to fruition, go find another company to work for because there's plenty of them that are looking. So the reason I wanted to have our next guest on as a little bit of a segue, because as I'm talking about outsourcing your marketing and then talking about in bringing sales more into the process, the reason I wanted to have our next guest on is over the last year, we have seen some of those lines blur between sales and marketing. So let's go to the freight sales expert himself, Michael Neme. He's an agency owner and VP of Supply Chain Solutions. Welcome in, Michael.
What's up?
Finally, I'm glad to finally have you on the show. And I think for most folks who follow you on LinkedIn, or maybe they don't follow you on LinkedIn, but hopefully will after this show, how did you get into the world of logistics? Sort of break down how you got started in and what your current role is.
So yeah, I like most people, no one really goes unless you're like strictly going in for supply chain. But again, on the sales side, I don't think anybody really goes into college thinking, hey, I'm gonna, get into shipping. Funny story, I graduated, ended up working as a bar manager for like 6 months, didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then got called by a recruiter, Chaz, shout out to Chaz, to work for a company, Worldwide Express, back in 2014. And, you know, that's where it all started. Built my career at Worldwide Express. Moved into leadership at Worldwide Express. I was there for about like 4.5 years. Then kind of, dipped my toe in a couple different companies. Kind of just got sick of, having to, again, I think I want to point this out. I think there's value in, working for big corporations. You learn a process and whatnot. But at some point, I just said, hey, I don't want to really work for anybody else. And which led me into, Global Trans. Brian Coleman, again, shout out to Brian Coleman. He recruits like agents from Global Trans for Global Trans. And this dude was literally trying to get me to come over to Global Trans since I think 2016. And
Oh, wow.
I didn't move over. Yeah, right. So talk about persistence, never pushy. There was a couple different times that was still even when I was at Worldwide Express. Yeah, I just moved into leadership. And again, never pushy, was just kind of trying to fill me out what I was looking for and just stayed persistent. So that kind of really always stuck out to me. It was like, hey, listen, if I'm going to go this route, on top of, amongst other things that Global Trans offers, I was like, just something about that where it's like this person I wasn't just like another number to them. They were literally persistent in getting me to come over to Global Trans on the agency side for 4 years. So
So he put in
now,
the work.
what'd you say?
I said, so he put in the work because your common phrase that you say pretty often is real is rare. So
Oh yeah.
would you say that is where I guess sort of the inspiration for that phrase came from, is when you started on your agency path?
Yeah, no, I've always, so it's funny is I was probably like the worst person to try to sell because like we almost get to the final like end of like, okay, maybe he thought he was going to be like, okay, Nimi's going to come over now. And I'd be like, no, I'm fine where I'm at right now. And I was like, thinking back at it, it's like, damn, but he stayed persistent. He didn't burn the bridge. I mean, you hear me talk about, a lot of agents I know that come over are really just focused on bringing their book of business, or they're more transactional. Whereas I have never sold transactional deals. So I was very, interested in, I was like, hey, put me in contact with your managed trans people. And this is back this was 3 years before I even signed, right? So he was getting me in front of people at Global Trans that could, potential, again, from a managed transportation standpoint. So he was doing all the work. I don't know. He was just he's just a good dude and persistent. And that's someone, again, put aside all the bells and whistles that Global Trans offers. That's just someone I trust, right? Like, regardless, I'm just like, okay, this guy, he's been this persistent. I trust him. I'm not just a number.
So the real is rare probably came from him then, I would imagine, or the inspiration from it. But it's the sort of that work ethos, I think.
No, real is rare has like always been something. I mean, I got it tattooed on me. It's always been. I think it's like unapologetically yourself, right? And
Hmm,
we all say we're real, but to what extent, right? And I've always just, again, unless you're like blatantly just like disrespectful, but like I just always found it, fascinating people, like whether even the people I don't necessarily like, but they're just themselves. I can appreciate that, right? And you just can feel the vibe of someone that is literally unapologetically themselves. And again, it goes back to, even if I don't like that person, there's a lot of people that I probably wouldn't hang out with or even like, that are just so real that I can appreciate that.
hmm.
And two, I just trust those people. Like, if someone told me to F off and just was real, though, it's like I trust that person more than someone that just isn't as real. I mean, I know it sounds
Right.
kind of corny, but I mean, again, you could, if you know, you know. And I feel
It's
like, most people can feel it out that, hey, this person's actually just 100% themselves.
No, I agree completely because I think that you can tell the word authenticity is thrown around all the time, but I think that that
Yeah.
is really that's what it draws back to is, are you authentic in what you're saying, and what are you practicing, what you're preaching, and can people trust you with the advice that you're giving out? And sort of that brings me to my next question, which, historically speaking, marketing and sales, in this conversation, for perspective, I'm going to represent the marketing role, you're representing the sales role. They've had kind of a rocky relationship. What are some of the things that marketers like myself can do for sales that I would say are historically a waste of time? And then what can they do that they're not, that they can help sales out even more?
Yeah, so I mean, I know I gave you a little bit more context on my side of things from even like college, right? I like minored in marketing, and majored in public relations. So, PR was definitely, very broad. We got a little taste of everything. I think I think from a sales standpoint, most salespeople have a huge ego and don't realize, like, our job. To me, my job is easy, right? It's the other people that really keep are the glue, right? Marketing, operations, accounting, credit, collections. So from a marketing standpoint, I think that where companies, I guess, fail is, it's just, if you look at like a company's page, right? Most companies' pages are so horrible. All they do is talk about culture. They don't really talk about anything about their target audience. Like, think about it. No one's like, you look at a company's page, it just, to me, it's so cookie cutter-ish, right? So it's like, that's where, from just a strictly a sales standpoint, I think you need to be you need to market yourself. You need to market, who you're going after as a target audience. And, only tips I could give to, strictly just someone that is marketing, spend some, both sales and marketing people, or sales, meaning sales people, spend time with the marketing department, building out, I don't know, content that's going to target customers that you are your target audience, right? Because no one's really, at least I don't see it from a company standpoint, really targeting any type of challenges that, their current target customers are having. And that's an issue. It's like, they just talk about company culture, and I get they got to recruit people, and that's great, but there needs to be more content, uh, around what does your customers wants and needs, what are those wants and needs, and targeting those, if that makes sense to you.
It does, because in a previous role, I served as editor in chief of a magazine, and the most I got out of our sales meetings was actually sitting in on the meetings that they would have with customers and learning what they were trying to pitch to the customers and how we can make it work from an editorial standpoint. And so that applies to logistics as well. Every marketer should be sitting in with the sales team, listening to what those conversations
Yeah.
with prospects and customers and what those conversations sound like. Because if you're not doing that, then you don't have any idea what to put on your website, in your email, on social. You have no idea. You're just sort of flying blind. So I think
Why
that
things
is
are like
where.
sorry, but that's why things are so like cookie cutter. It's like you look on
Exactly.
websites straight up. It's like, cool, we do it all. Like it's just, I mean, it's pathetic. I mean, I mean, straight up, it's like, okay, what? It's almost like you don't even, you don't, companies don't even know like who their target audience is, right? And if that's the case, I mean, here, listen, I'm not sitting here trying to reinvent the wheel for these large organizations or even say anything bad about it, but I think this: if you are in sales, you're not going to reinvent the wheel and you work for a large company or even any company. You're not probably not going to reinvent the wheel for your entire marketing, right? But I would say is what you can do is market yourself and get close with whoever you have. If your company has like marketing managers or even just marketing people, right? Get close with them. Start bringing that, like you said, start bringing them on your meetings because guess what? If you're a good marketer, they're creative, right? So salespeople, I would be picking the brains of, you know, these marketers and be like, hey, listen, this is what I'm going for. How do we make this sound kind of like catchy? Right. And then that's how you work together. And I think it just only is going to grow yourself or grow your business in general.
Would you say that that is maybe one of the bigger things that has changed over the last year? Is that salespeople need to start branding themselves? Would you say that's a symptom of COVID, or was that happening maybe before COVID happened?
I mean, COVID definitely. I mean, you had to, right? I mean, nobody even. It's funny. It's like nobody even heard of like. I mean, people knew logistics, but it's like, let's face it, COVID. I feel like the biggest industry that like started being talked about. Would you agree? Is logistics, right? So, definitely COVID played a part in having people start marketing themselves, but even to this day it's still so small. Like I just don't understand it, right? It's like you look at certain people and it's like even the people I've used to work with, like for instance, I was bred into a company, great company, but it was like door to door sales or business to business sales, and they still have that mentality of like, hey, listen, that's going to be our bread and butter, and I am 100% about that, but they're not building. Year later they haven't built anything from a brand standpoint, and I guarantee they're hurting from it, right? So, the people that capitalized on branding themselves during COVID, awesome. But the people that didn't are really hurting. But yeah, I mean, COVID definitely. What else are you going to do, right? It's like at some point you couldn't do anything but market yourself.
Right, and I think a lot of companies were scared to let their employees sort of market themselves, but then when they're not working in the office each day, they're working remotely. I think it made it a lot easier for those types of people that are comfortable getting out into the world and promoting themselves to have a little bit more access to it. But let's switch gears a little bit because let's say
Can
you're
we hit on
fresh
this
out of
real quick?
college.
Can we hit on this real quick? Sorry, I
Yeah,
have to.
please.
You said something about like it's another prime example of why corporations, again, I'm not trying to switch the wheel, but it's like let people be who they are, right? People, it's so like it's something so simple, but think about it. I was so watered down, and again, I this is not me talking like bad about working for directly for a corporation, which there's a ton of value in it, but
Mhm.
I was so watered down. I mean, even in 2016, I tried to be posted on LinkedIn, and I would get like text from like a manager that says, "Hey, you got to take that down, or you got to do this," and it's like that is an
Wow.
issue. That is an issue if you are like you're not letting someone like be themselves. Even to this day, I have friends that are work as an agent or franchise owners for other companies that are still like told, "Hey, you can't do this," and it's just like
Wow.
that is a huge issue. It's like you can't truly. I think it's
I think they
companies need to
operate out of
stop it.
fear. I think the companies operate out of fear, and that they think that if this employee posts too much, then they're gonna get too big, and then they're just gonna leave us. But there probably studies show that, most millennials only stay at a job for 2 years anyway, so they're gonna leave you regardless. So why don't you just capitalize on their
Well, then
branding and their attempt at branding? Have some parameters, but let them be creative themselves.
most people in the professional world aren't going to be like I'm pretty absurd, right? Like at some for some things, right? And I think people just at the end of the day, people are going to do what they want to do, and you got to just trust, right? And that's the biggest thing is it's like if you're already worried. I mean, there's that quote. It's like treat people right so they don't leave or whatever. But it's like, if you are already not trusting your employees, to have a mind of their own, and represent your company, and you don't believe that they can do that, then what's that say about your own hiring process, right? It's like, dude, I mean, at the end of the day, if you can't do that, you got way bigger issues than
Right.
than worried about your
You have to look a
marketing.
little bit internally for your processes. And I think another one of those notes that there's a lot of frustration, especially from folks that have switched gears. I know a lot of people that were in the restaurant industry switch gears to working in logistics, and the first thing that happens to them is they sit them at a desk at a big 3PL, or maybe not, maybe even a mid-sized 3PL. They sit them at a desk and they throw them a list of cold leads in order to work, and that's their introduction to the world of brokering logistics and brokering freight. So if you were one of those people, what would be the first step that you would do? Would you work those cold leads, or would you just start working and carving out your own path?
I mean, you always have cold leads, right? But it's like, again, I was very fortunate enough to work with a company that, I talk about it all the time. It's like, I feel like a black swan. There's very few people that are just only have sold strategic accounts, right? All in accounts. So it's like, we were taught, how the supply chain impacts businesses, right? How to go to cold call, right? And people say cold calling. I more or less figured out, okay, hey, the supply chain impacts these departments. I'm going to go just gather information and pull out pain points, and then go set a meeting with, the owner of the company, right? Whereas other companies, like you just said, they get these cold, or they get these companies. And again, I was walking through industrial parks. I had a territory. So they were still companies. It was like basically getting a list. But I also had a roadmap to know what to do, how to qualify, my target customers that I wanted to go after. Whereas 99% of people again, that's me just saying 99%, but a lot of people in this company, or in this industry, call companies and just say, "Hey, do you ship? Let me get on the list. Let me get on the list." And I would listen. I would never go to that. Like, I mean, even if I didn't know what I know now, it just doesn't seem like scalable, right? It's like, that's why there's so much turnover rate. That's why, again, people like me take business from people like that, or companies like that just literally do that, right? Everybody ships. You don't even have a target audience. So I'd be careful on who you go work for, knowing what pick your boss, right? I say
Mhm.
your first, if you're right out of college and it's your first gig, money, yes, you need to survive, but I wouldn't so much worry about the money. I'd be worried about, like, who you're reporting to, what have they done, what have other reps said about them, how many reps have they scaled in their career, and because that's the person you're going to learn from the most,
Hmm.
right, in the beginning. And I would value that versus the company you work for, and the bells and whistles that the company offers. I would just strictly focus on who's the person you're going to report to.
Super smart insight. And there was another piece of advice that I heard you mention in another show, that one of your sort of cold calling tactics is to reach out to the accounting side of the
Mhm.
business that you're targeting, because you want to find out the pain points that they are going through. What are 2 to 3, I guess, accounting insights that would make someone in sales better at their job?
I mean, accounting is everything. Finance is everything. Like, I don't even have to call logistics, or I don't want to, like, let's be, I don't really want to call shipping, right? For the mere fact of 99% of the industry is literally blowing them up. They don't want to talk to me. They're going to just think, again, click. So when I think about big picture and, accounting, finance, that's impacting the company, and supply chain plays a big role in that, right? So again, you can get all the information you need from accounting. Hey, listen, you just switch your brain set, right? Or your mindset. Instead of thinking shipments, you say, hey, I always would say is like, hey, do you handle, the paying the invoices of your transportation? Yes. Okay. What's your process like when you allocate transportation costs, or how do you get bills? Oh, we get bills coming in left and right, some from, snail mail, some coming in electronically, some consolidated. It's a pain in the butt. I spend hours a week just having to, do a checks and balances on what we were quoted versus what we were billed. Okay, ding, ding, ding. You're probably losing a lot of money. That's a lot of time spent doing tedious work, when I can just, again, one stop shop it, consolidate your invoices, and break it down to how you want to see your invoices, right? Do you allocate by location? Do you allocate by GL codes? I can already have that consolidated on a weekly basis for you. That's a huge value add, right? That's just like from a process standpoint.
Hmm.
You talk about accounting, it's like, okay, hey, most companies, right? Take this for example. Most companies don't even properly allocate their transportation costs into their own pricing model, right? So you'll go into a company, or I'll call into accounting and say, hey, listen, I know you guys are, going into XYZ big box retailers. When you guys are, pricing out your product, how do you guys like price out, allocate transportation cost into your price? Well, we just tack on a 12% of the 12% of the sale. Well, how did you get to that 12%? Well, we just guessed. Okay, well, 9 times out of 10, that 12% is really 18%, and they're eating a ton of costs that they don't even need to eat, and they could have fixed just by simply doing a cost to serve analysis. And that's something that I've always just thought about in my head. Right? Forget the rates. Let's focus on these kind of processes, such as building out a cost to serve analysis and properly allocating our transportation costs into our pricing model, so that not only do we just drive out transportation costs, we also increase profitability.
Hmm. Really good insight. And then you're
That's
coming
something.
to an executive with that perspective of this is, hard data that you're working with instead of just throwing something against the wall and hoping that it sticks. So instead you're offering real value from the jump. So that gives you sort of a leg up in that
Think
next
about
level
that.
conversation.
I mean, honestly, if supply chain, and I get so frustrated, but like the supply chain transportation, listen, price matters and rates will always have some type of play in it. But I think everybody in this industry, you know, needs to change their mindset. And I think anybody that has ran a business, any executive or anybody with that's logical would agree that you know knowing your cost to serve is crucial before you even talk about rates, right? It's like, what are like, yeah, you got great rates, but it's like, does it matter? Like, if you're not properly allocating your transportation costs, or you don't know your cost to serve per, customer location, it really doesn't matter. I'd rather have more ammo for my customer, where it's like, okay, here's your cost to serve. Now, when you go into these Walmart DCs, you have a better understanding. And again, nothing's going to be set in stone, but hypothetically, you know what it's going to cost you with transportation going into all these different locations to Walmart and all the to Walmart. And now you could start strategically going in and negotiating your pricing with Walmart, right? Which is only going to benefit you. And then we can look at, okay, how do we negotiate specifically, transportation rates based upon the data we have from the cost of service analysis. Does that make sense to you? It's like having a program, like you wouldn't just start again like a workout program, right?
Hmm.
Want to
Yeah, you're not
know,
just going to
want to
start
track
squatting
something?
200 pounds.
Yeah, it's like my body. I can eat more calories than your body, but you just have to have some type of roadmap, and nobody really has a roadmap, and they're so strictly focused on really rates. Like it's honestly only rates, and that's the biggest thing. Why I think also executives don't really pay attention, or when I call into them, is they think they don't want to have a shipping conversation. They want to have a business conversation, and finance and accounting is so crucial to that.
I love it. Really, really great insight. Michael, where can people find more of your sales gyms? Where can people find more of your work?
Just LinkedIn. I post a lot. I'm building out a YouTube thing. I got some things in the works. I got videos on YouTube that I probably haven't even posted on LinkedIn. YouTube is Midwest Mike. Um, so yeah, find me on there if you wanna know me more personally. I haven't posted in a while since this whole COVID thing, but you can follow me on Instagram, Midwest Mike 87. But yeah, I'm mostly active on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Wish we had more time to sort of dive into the meat and potatoes more of the conversation, but appreciate your time today. And I encourage everyone to give you a follow because it's really great stuff, especially the marketers out there.
Seriously, love you. Thank
Thank you so much. All right. Well, we talked about a lot of sales and marketing so far in this show. So let's keep it going. But this time we're going to actually get the tech angle in mind. So let's welcome in Nick Dangles. He is the co-founder of Kinetic. Welcome in, Nick. And let's sort of go through the same thing. How did you get into the world of logistics?
Hey, first of all, you didn't tell me I was following up Nimi. This is a tough act to follow, right? Like he spent probably half an hour sitting on one of my ideas the other day. I love Mike. We might as well
That's
just shut it down right now, though.
right. He just brings the truth to the table. And I probably had six more questions that I wanted to ask, but this is live TV. So here we are. We're
Yeah,
moving on
yeah,
into
he
the
does. He
tech
definitely
angle of
does
the
that.
show. So you're going to bring value too. So let's give the people a little bit of a background on your career in the world of logistics, as I'm sure it's non-conventional as most of us find ourselves in.
Yeah, so background on my background here. I've been in logistics for 10 years, all in brokerage. And prior to that, God, I used to be an attorney in my 20s, and God, it's a story probably best told over a couple beers sometime why I'm not an attorney anymore. But like suffice to say, it wasn't a good fit for me. I tried to get into sales, but I ran into the problem of being both underqualified and overqualified, right? Nobody wants to hire a 28-year-old former attorney for their entry level sales job because they figure I'm going to
Mm,
bail in 6 months. So I ended up selling office supplies door to door for Quill, which was just a nightmare, but I
wow.
learned a lot. Super humbling experience. Yeah, super humbling experience. And from there, I kind of fell into logistics and just had a great time doing it. Got caught up by the like instant gratification, the fast pace of it. And then as I kind of got more experienced in the industry, I saw how much there really was to logistics, and it just hooked me in. That's how I got into it. That's why I'm still doing it. That's why we're doing what we're doing now.
And speaking of what you're doing now, you're a co-founder of Kinetic, and you help companies. Correct me if I'm wrong. You help companies sort of in the tech space enter into the freight market when they kind of don't really have a clue of how to enter in the freight market. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, yeah. So like our little pitch is that we work with freight tech companies and help them get their products to market more quickly and with better adoption. And like more specifically, we work with them on things like sales and marketing and customer success.
And on your website, it said you help companies with their go-to-market strategy. What essentially is all involved in a go-to-market strategy, and can only new companies take advantage of that?
No, so I mean, ultimately your go to market is just your plan for launching your product or service into the market. And it encompasses a lot of things, right? It's what problem does your product solve? Who's your target audience? What's your message to that audience? Um, what's your sales and marketing strategy? Anything like that kind of falls into your go to market strategy. And like to answer the second part of your question, no, it's not just for companies that are just starting out. Like established companies do the same thing. If you have I don't know, if you have a new product line, you're going to have come up with a new go to market for that product line. If you're trying to enter into a new industry, like if you're very prevalent in food and beverage and you're trying to get into logistics, you might have a different go to market for that. So it's really applicable to a lot of different companies at a lot of different stages of growth. Though it's most common probably in the smaller startups.
And where are some of the areas that they're getting wrong when or maybe some of the things that are eye catching to you before they go to market?
I would say two things kind of jump out to me the most in that. One is understanding your audience, and two is understanding your messaging. And I'll go into each one of these a little bit. When I talk about understanding your audience, I mean, when you talk about logistics, a lot of times you hear about this multi-trillion-dollar industry, right? With all this opportunity. And that's true. It's true and it sounds great to investors when they see this like total addressable market in the trillions. But like realistically, what's your individual market for your software? Is it
Mm,
that $1 trillion market? Probably not. You know, Very likely we run across companies that like they're a software that specifically targets brokers, say. Well, like that's not nearly the same size. And you probably don't even target all brokers. More than likely you target a specific subset of brokers because once you hit a certain revenue size, you're probably building your own technology. If you're too small, like you don't realistically need certain types of tech. So
Hmm.
like your actual audience is somewhere in the middle. You got to figure out like what that revenue range is, and you got to figure out even smaller minutia, like is it a certain type of freight mix that we cater to? You know, if a broker has mostly contractual freight, is that a better fit for us versus if they have mostly transactional freight? I mean, it plays a big part in what technology they need. And if you don't know this kind of stuff, you're either selling to the wrong people or you're selling to the right people but the wrong way. And that's a
Hmm.
big problem for a lot of freight tech companies. I
And
rambled
when
through.
you
Good.
No, no, that's great because you actually brought up a part of the next question that I wanted to ask. Because in the pre-show document that we ran through, you mentioned something that was really interesting to me, and you said service isn't enough for brokers to rely on anymore. They need to adopt some technology to stay competitive. So, flipping the script a little bit from the freight tech companies that are entering the space, what about the
Mhm.
brokers that are entering the space? For a new company, what are some of the must-have technologies that brokers need to invest in?
You know, it's a tough question, and like I don't want to give you some generic "it depends" answer, but I'm kind of going to, because I know. But it's dependent on a lot of different things. You know,
Sure.
what are your growth plans? What's your cash flow look like? How well funded are you? What is your freight mix? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? All of
Hmm.
those things. I mean, if you're just a guy starting up a brokerage on his own in his garage, your needs are going to be much different from some venture backed uh, brokerage with huge scaling plans in the next several years. Um, if I were to give kind of just a cookie cutter answer to that, though, I like you definitely need a TMS. Like you're gonna struggle surviving without some sort of a TMS. I'm big on capacity management tools. I think those can be extremely helpful for brokerages of any size. Digital tracking is a big one. You know, it's becoming, if it's not already, it's becoming a contractual requirement for any enterprise shipper you're going to come across. Like, if you don't
Hmm.
have digital tracking, just like people just aren't going to work with you in the near future here. And then accounting and back office. I mean, Nimi actually touched on this a lot. He talks a lot about how important it is, and he's right. You know, it's not the sexiest area of freight tech by any means, but there's a ton of opportunity to save cost in the back office, and there are a lot of companies doing some really interesting stuff there.
Hmm. Well, give us a few of the companies that are doing some interesting things on the accounting side, since it's relevant to this one.
Yeah, so on the accounting side, Melio payments I think is an interesting one. When you think it helps with cash flow, it's not a factoring company, but you can help. It helps by allowing you to pay some of your vendors by credit card, even where they don't accept credit card payments, which is
Hmm.
huge to get that extra 30 days of float for some of these brokers. Like cash flow is one of the main reasons that like early brokers go out of business. And then there's other things like HubTrain's a big one, Triumph Pay. Anything on that side of things is definitely worth taking a look at.
Now, coming from the executive side of things, I think that there's always been an issue where executives they find that shiny new piece of software and they just want to initiate it and just buy it immediately before they even consult with their team. But what should a company do before that purchase is made to make sure it's a good fit within their processes?
So to make sure technology is going to be a good fit for you, I would say you kind of have to go through the exercise of figuring out what your specific problems are, not just what people are telling you to buy. You know,
Hmm.
there's a lot of technology out there that they run into the exact same problem you mentioned. You know, it sits in their office and it's more just like tech decoration than anything else, and
Hmm.
they point to it for their customer and say, "Hey, check this out. Look what we've got." It's there at least, right? But like to get value out of it, try to figure out what your actual problems are and what technology you need or that could be used to fix those problems. And it's not just C-suite problems, it's seat level users. What's Billy
Hmm.
in the corner struggling with every day? How can you help him out and get some sort of an impact for that guy?
No, I love that. Going to the employees that are in the trenches and getting the perspective from them versus the executive team that maybe doesn't have that hands-on approach as much as they used to. What's some technology that's entered the freight space that has you really excited outside of the accounting solutions? But are there any other tools out there that has you really excited for the future?
God, there's so much stuff out there. I'll try to narrow it down a little bit. I'm really excited about what I'd call workflow automation, like Hub Tech and Tabby, that what they've got going on there. There are so many manual processes that are just like repetitively click this button, then click this button, then click this button. That anything you can do to automate that stuff is really valuable and saves a ton of time. I'm also really excited about what's going on with dynamic pricing nowadays. There's so much data available for people, and pricing is such a hot topic that to think that we're still relying on data that's like 2 weeks old and trying to figure out based on that what we're going to pay today, like it's mind-boggling sometimes when there are better solutions out there, like green screens and Sonar that are doing some really interesting stuff with pricing.
Now, bringing it back to Kinetic, your company, especially with sales, you focus a lot in that area. How are you approaching the modern sales process in sort of the media landscape that we find ourselves in?
I approach it. We're heavily into social selling. Like providing valuable content for people rather than just pitching them on yourself, right? Like you'll see us doing webinars and you'll see me doing LinkedIn content, and we suggest the same thing for our customers, right? You don't just need to go out into the world and shout your name to everybody. You need to provide content that actually makes sense to them, that they get some sort of value out of.
Are there any, I guess, what are the most important platforms that you guys are focusing on right now and in the near future? Is it like
Uh,
social media? Is it maybe email? You mentioned webinars. Are there any other maybe like in-person events now that things are starting to open back up? Where are you guys going to be planning to focus your efforts?
yeah, like transportation can be a little bit weird when it comes to marketing because like what I would consider traditional marketing methods don't like often don't work as effectively because
Right.
well, like it's so word of mouth and so based on who that like people aren't really going to whatever like magazine you're reading and looking at an ad for your company, right? It's more like they're looking at like whoever their buddy recommended, or they're like watching webinars, or they're on LinkedIn and Facebook. They're reading articles, and they're just listening to people whose opinions they value. Like I hate to use the word influencers, but like the influencers out there. So anything you can do to leverage that kind of stuff, I think there's a huge amount of value in that for companies.
Now, we talked early on in the show about how marketing can help the sales team more effectively. In your experience, where does marketing at most freight companies fall short?
You know, I'll spin that a little bit. So instead of freight companies, I'll talk about the freight tech companies. And so for this, it's oftentimes the messaging itself. You know, the messaging itself doesn't it doesn't relate enough to the day to day of the freight companies. You know, oftentimes the messaging it focuses on what's important to the freight tech company, and what's important to the freight tech company versus the freight company are two very different things. The freight tech company is often very excited about their technology and their integrations and all sorts of other buzzwords, and like I don't want to diminish that because they are very important, but what's important for the day to day of a guy running a freight company is very different. And you have to make sure that your messaging actually is relatable to that person because that's who you're selling to, right?
And speaking of that, we talked earlier about the new brokerages that are coming into the scene and the technology that they need to be investing in. What about some of the legacy companies? Are you seeing any? They're usually or historically the ones to grasp onto technology. They're the ones that have the budget, right?
Mhm.
So, are there any Are there any, I guess, tech in the space of the legacy companies that you sort of see as going away that they need to invest more into a new frame of thinking?
It's so dependent on the individual company. I mean, like you got some of your larger players who are like very advanced when it comes to technology. They've been building their own proprietary tech for years, and what they have is amazing. But like some of the smaller ones, like small to mid-sized ones, again, it kind of boils down to figuring out what works best for you. I would say that like my biggest takeaway is just like do something. Like the only wrong answer is going through that exercise, figuring out what your problems are, and thinking, well, we've been doing this for the past 20 years, and it seems to be working. So let's just keep doing this for the next 20 and see what happens. Well, that's not going to work for you. Like if that's your response, like the next 20 years aren't going to go well. If no matter what you do, just do something and it'll be
Are there
better than
any
nothing.
of the larger companies? I mean, JB Hunt comes to mind for me. That's a legacy company that's
Mhm.
consistently evolving and adapting adapting new technologies and just ways of thinking. Are there any other companies out there, legacy wise, that you think are doing a good job of transitioning their teams into the modern workforce?
You know, I think they're all taking steps to varying degree, right? Like
Mhm.
there are amazing things going on in a lot of this company. Like US Express and Variant is doing some really cool stuff out there. I mean, you can probably rattle off the top 10 brokers and they all have different ways that they're trying to embrace technology. And it's great to see. I think they're the ones kind of leading um, the more widespread adoption of technology.
Where do you see I guess, the tech space evolving over the next few years, and how can companies sort of capitalize on that without overwhelming their users or their employees, I should say?
Yeah, without overwhelming your users is important, and that kind of goes to the customer success piece of all of this. And that's something that a lot of freight tech companies do struggle with sometimes because a, a lot of the time you bring some new technology on board and like for whatever reason it doesn't get used. And oftentimes it's not the fault of the technology itself. It's more related to how it was introduced and what the training was, you know? So
Hmm.
instead of thinking to yourself like, oh, like this technology just isn't working for me, like think about how it was actually presented to your people. Was it presented in terms of here's your new platform, like click these buttons, this is how it works, just do this? Or was it really described to them in terms of this is why you need to use it. This is
Hmm.
the benefit that you're going to get from this tool, and it's going to drive a lot more adoption from your users, and it's going to overwhelm them less because they're going to understand why they need to use it.
Yeah, because then you can kind of just break down of how it fits into their day versus just being an additional thing that they have to check or that they have to do each day. So I think you really hit on that earlier, is to figure out the problems first. Go to those, I don't want to say low level, but entry level is probably the better phrase to use. Go to those entry level employees first. Figure out what their stop gaps are in their workday, and then figuring out the software that fits into those stop gaps instead of just trying to force something that may not work and may be a big waste of money. All right, Nick,
Yeah.
this was really, really insightful. Where can folks find more of your work in Kinetic?
Yeah, so feel free to check me out on LinkedIn. I'm there a lot. And if you want to reach out to me directly, my email is nick@poweredbykinetic.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It was great insight.
All right, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me on.
Now that was a really great. I told you earlier we had a jam-packed show. We went headfirst diving into how marketing and sales and technology can all sort of form this greater cohesive vibe with each other. And a few takeaways that really stood out to me, especially with our chats with Nick and also with Michael, is that especially from the sales side, on the sales side of things, is really having that deep understanding of where the costs are coming from. So connecting with your accounting department, connecting with your finance team, and that's really great insight for all of the marketers out there too. Understanding where those pain points are coming from. Are there any additional charges that your customers are going through that they might need to know about ahead of time? That might be that might be a great fit for an FAQ page on your website, or really trying to get ahead of that messaging, and so that the sales team is aware of those different charges that may end up on a customer's bill, so they're not blindsided by it, so they can effectively communicate that information to them. And then bringing it full circle with having those regular conversations with your entry level employees, and then also within the rest of the employees within the organization, especially the leaders of different departments, whether it's the customer service team, the tracking team, going off the accounting team again. Meeting with those different departments regularly from a marketing perspective is so very, very important, because then you can really understand what is driving business, what's driving the ship of the entire company, what's driving revenue. And then the copy just essentially writes itself. And you're going to use that copy, you're going to use that messaging across all of your different platforms, whether it's your website, your email, your social media, all of that good stuff. it's really going to apply. And a little added tip before we close out for the show: start a Lingo library document. I do this for each one of my clients, and I do it for myself too. I have a Google document where each time I have these conversations, I'm writing in that Lingo library of the exact phrases that people use whenever they're talking to me about their problems, because then I'm going to use that exact language on across all of my marketing. So just a little added tip: start a Lingo library document. It's really super valuable. But until next week, I am Blythe Brumleve, owner of digitaldispatch.io, a freight and marketing company, and I will see you right here next week on this episode of Cyberly.